Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Dave Shaw? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. David John Shaw was born on July 20, 1954, in Western Australia. He went by the name Dave. From an early age, Dave took an interest in aviation. By 1973, he found a job as a crop duster, which is a hazardous line of work. This same year, Dave met a woman named Anne, and they became romantically involved. The couple married in 1974. In 1981, the family moved to Papua New Guinea, so Dave could work as a missionary pilot. This was a dangerous job, as he often flew to remote airfields on mountainous terrain. During this time, Dave and Anne had 2 children, Stephen and Lisa. The Shaw family moved a few more times before ending up in New South Wales, Australia, where Dave flew corporate jets. In 1989, Dave started working as a pilot for the airline Cathay Pacific, which is based in Hong Kong. The family moved there, and Dave's wife found a job at a high school. In 1999, Dave developed an interest in diving, which transformed into a specific interest in cave diving. Dave also became fascinated with a piece of diving equipment called a rebreather. Traditional divers use open-circuit scuba gear, which supplies them with a cold mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. Another option is a device called a closed-circuit rebreather. This device recycles warm gas to the diver. It still requires a diver to carry tanks, of course, but a rebreather is much more efficient and not as much gas is required. In addition, with the rebreather, the gas is warm, so it's easier for the diver to avoid hypothermia, a major problem that divers face. The rebreather is not without its downsides. If something goes wrong with the rebreather controller, the diver must manually manage the gas mixture, and rebreathers are incredibly expensive. Dave Shaw became a big fan of the rebreather and wanted to demonstrate that it could be used at depths where traditional open-circuit scuba gear had been dominant. He purchased an expensive rebreather that was designed to be used at a maximum depth of 330 feet and modified it to be used at greater depths, or at least this is what he believed. In 2002, Dave Shaw visited a dive center in South Africa owned by a former British soldier named Don Shirley. The two became friends and frequently went diving together. In October 2003, Dave used the modified rebreather to dive to a depth of 597 feet in a cave, which was a record for a cave dive using a rebreather. 2 days later, Dave reached a depth of 610 feet. Don Shirley functioned as a backup on these dives and was amazed with Dave's diving abilities. In June 2004, Dave and Don went to a cave called Bushman's Hole in the northern Cape province of South Africa. This is the 3rd deepest freshwater cave in the world. The bottom of the cave slopes. The maximum depth is at least 927 feet. Dave went to a record depth of 725 feet. On October 28, 2004, Dave Shaw and Don Shirley once again found themselves diving in Bushman's Hole. Dave made it to the bottom of the cave and started looking around. In this particular location, the cave floor was at a depth of 886 feet. Therefore, Dave had set another record. At one point, Dave looked to his left and saw the remains of a human body in a diving suit about 50 feet away. He immediately knew who the body belonged to. Dave had found a South African diver named Dion Dreyer. About 10 years earlier, on December 17, 1994, 20-year-old Dion died while on a practice dive in Bushman's Hole. It's not exactly clear what happened. Other divers believe that Dion lost consciousness as he was ascending. 2 weeks later, a small submarine was used to search for Dion's body, but only his dive helmet was found. His family accepted that recovering Dion's body was unlikely. A plaque was mounted at the entrance to the cave commemorating Dion. After Dave spotted Dion's body, he tried to free him from the mud, but Dion's air cylinders were embedded. Dave started panting from the exertion and had to give up. In order to facilitate finding his way back on another dive, Dave tied a line to Dion's tanks. As soon as Dave surfaced, he made it clear that he intended to go back soon and recover Dion's body. He worked with Don Shirley to develop a plan for what they referred to as the Big Dive. It was scheduled for January 2005. This mission was exceptionally dangerous. If the recovery of Dion's body was successful, the achievement would represent the deepest body recovery in the history of diving. Dave and Don assembled a team of 25 people to assist with the mission, including support divers, paramedics, a physician, and a cameraman. The idea was to turn the mission into a documentary, which eventually happened, although it had a different tone than originally anticipated. The diving team came up with a plan that involved divers waiting at various depths and passing Dion's body from one diver to the next on the way up. Dave Shaw was going to occupy the position at the greatest depth. His job was to physically retrieve Dion's remains and place them in a body bag. At that point, Dave would ascend and pass the body to Don Shirley at a depth of 725 feet. Don would pass the body bag to the next diver, and so on. Dave allotted 5 minutes to cut Dion's remains from the dive suit and place them in the body bag, so there wasn't a lot of room for error as far as the times. The mission would require Dave being in the water for over 10 hours. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. Dave Shaw arrived in South Africa on January 2, 2005, 6 days before the big dive was scheduled. He practiced with various aspects of the dive, like operating the body bag. On Saturday, January 8, 2005, the recovery mission was launched. At 6:15 a.m., Dave went into the water. It was his 333rd dive. Don Shirley followed at 6:28 a.m. By this time, Dave had already reached the floor of the cave. It took him just over 11 minutes, which was ahead of schedule. As Don was moving toward his goal, a depth of 725 feet, he could see the light being carried by Dave, who was 886 feet down. Don noticed that the light wasn't moving and no bubbles were coming up. These were strong indicators that something had gone horribly wrong. In an effort to render assistance, Don continued to dive toward Dave. When he was at about 800 feet down, the rebreather controller on his left arm cracked and imploded. This meant that Don was going to have to monitor his oxygen levels and manually inject oxygen into his breathing loop. Don started his ascent, mostly due to the not wanting to die part. He knew that Dave was dead by this point and wasn't interested in joining him. Don met up with a support diver at a depth of 400 feet. The diver had descended 125 feet farther than planned in order to render assistance. Don signaled for the diver to give him a slate and wrote the words, "Dave not coming back." Eventually, Don managed to get to the surface, but suffered horribly in the process. He sustained permanent damage to his left ear, which compromised his balance. 4 days later, on January 12, divers who were trying to recover Dave's equipment discovered the bodies of both Dave and Dion not far from the surface. Dave's body floated and pulled Dion's body because the bodies were attached. A camera, which had been attached to Dave's helmet, was also recovered. Here is what the video revealed about Dave's final moments. 12 minutes and 22 seconds into the dive, Dave reached Dion's body. As he tried to get the body bag over Dion's legs, Dion's head detached and started floating in front of Dave. This was probably frightening to Dave, but the real problem was the fact that Dion's body was floating. On Dave's previous trip, the body had been stuck in the mud. Dave had not anticipated having to deal with a floating body. Trying to place a floating body in a body bag at a depth of 886 feet is quite difficult, and the type of activity that people rarely practice. Dave worked diligently as he tried to achieve this goal and was exerting quite a bit. His breathing was heavy. For 2 reasons, Dave should have just abandoned the mission at that point. 1, the risk to his life was now even higher than the already ludicrous level that had existed. and 2, Dion's body was floating, and the line was attached. His body could have been recovered later using a lift bag. There was no need to continue working with the body bag. As Dave continued to struggle, he let go of his cave light. This was an extremely unwise move because it could become tangled on other gear. After almost 4 minutes on the cave floor, Dave lost his footing, but managed to get back to the body. He was suffering from nitrogen narcosis at this point, and his behavior was not making any sense. Narcosis has an effect similar to alcohol and benzodiazepines. Among other symptoms, it causes one's judgment to be impaired. After 5.5 minutes on the cave floor, Dave attempted to ascend, but his cave light became tangled with the cave line attached to Dion's tanks. He turned around and pulled on the cave line, but it was no use. Moments after this, Dave Shaw lost consciousness from carbon dioxide buildup and drowned. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts in a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Dave Shaw was a high sensation seeker who appeared to have a death wish. His life was full of one unnecessary risk after another. Dave became a pilot when he was still a teenager. When he was flying crop dusters, he almost died several times. Dave's job as a missionary pilot was not much safer. At one point, Dave purchased a yacht intending to sail around the world, even though his skill level was insufficient for this endeavor. After becoming interested in diving, Dave quickly progressed to depths which were inadvisable for his level of experience. He almost died a few times during his dive training by making mistakes that were completely avoidable. On one occasion, after conducting a long dive to an extreme depth, he flew a commercial aircraft the next day. His recklessness jeopardized the lives of everyone aboard that aircraft. Item number 2, Dave demonstrated a great deal of recklessness on the recovery mission in Bushman's Hole. He had purchased an expensive rebreather, which was extremely complex. The manufacturer rated the rebreather as safe to a depth of about 330 feet. Despite not being a mechanical engineer, a chemist, or any other occupation qualified to work on diving equipment, Dave modified his rebreather. He believed it was now safe to travel to a depth of about 900 feet. Dave led an expedition of 25 people in an effort to recover Dion's body. He said that he wanted to bring closure to a sad chapter in the lives of Dion's family members. At another point, Dave admitted that he conducted the mission simply to have an adventure. Both before and during the mission, Dave made poor decisions. He wasn't really an expert diver to the extent that he believed. Dave had rushed through his training, and almost all his dives were in calm, clear water. He planned to dive alone to the greatest depth. Diving alone is almost never a good idea. Dave did not conduct that many practice dives, especially considering the high level of risk involved in the recovery mission dive. He was using a modified rebreather, which was not tested or approved by scientists. Dave overexerted, trying to place the body in the body bag when there was no need to complete that task because the body was floating, and he dropped his cave light to free both his hands. There is the sense that Dave was simply looking for a thrill at any cost. Any excuse was good enough for him to risk his life, but there was no excuse for his bad behavior. Item number 3, Dave Shaw is a highly controversial figure in the world of diving. Some people believe that he was a pioneer in the area of rebreather technology and a hero for attempting to recover a diver's body. To be fair, he was successful in the body recovery. He even brought back an extra body, his own. Other people believe that Dave was a reckless and impulsive individual who risked his life and the lives of others. What should Dave's legacy be? I think that Dave Shaw generally did not want to put anyone else's life in danger. He told the other people on the mission that if he died, they should not make any effort whatsoever to recover his body because it was too dangerous. Unfortunately, despite his good intentions, Dave was impetuous and jeopardized the lives of other people. His recovery mission was reckless and unnecessary. One could argue that Dave was the type of person who was going to live his life on the edge, one way or the other. So at least the body recovery mission was a way to extract something good out of Dave's hazardous tendencies. The problem is that Dave involved others. This is often the case with reckless people. They do not necessarily want to harm anyone else, but in order to collect exciting experiences, they will expose others to danger. One of the most interesting traits of Dave Shaw was how he did seem to accept his own death. He was aware that his death was likely. I think that Dave Shaw was addicted to the dangerous drug of adventure and would have rather been dead than lose his supply. Those are my thoughts in the case of Dave Shaw. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.